A ferry crossed the river outside Kashima. A young Ronin paced the deck, boasting to anyone who'd listen that he'd never lost a duel. In the corner, an old man dozed against a sword he hadn't touched in years. The Ronin kicked the hilt. "Wake up! I hear you're a swordsman. Prove it." The old man opened one eye. "I haven't drawn this in 30 years. The Ronin laughed. "Then you're no swordsman at all." The old man closed his eye again. "That's exactly why I'm still breathing." By the time that ferry reached the far bank, one of those men would understand something about strength that most people never learn. The other would learn it the hard way, and it would cost him almost everything. Kaito was 17 when he arrived at Master Enomoto's dojo near Kashima, already furious at anyone who doubted he'd become the finest blade in the province. He won every sparring match he could find and picked fights he couldn't win. If a classmate so much as smirked at his stance, Kaito challenged him before the smirk finished forming. He called it discipline. It was something else. One evening, Kaito humiliated a younger student in front of the whole dojo, disarmed him in 4 seconds, then stood over him a beat too long, making sure everyone saw it. Master Enomoto watched in silence, then called Kaito to his quarters. "Why did you need to win that?" "Because he doubted me." He's 15. He doubts everyone, including himself. Why did his doubt need answering? Kaito had no reply. "A man with nothing to prove has nothing to lose," Enomoto said. "You've spent 3 years making yourself very easy to wound. Every stranger with an insult now owns a piece of you." He paused. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you about a swordsman who was never wounded that way. Not once in 60 years. Enomoto told him of Tsukahara Bokuden, a real swordsman, generations before either of them, founder of a school built on one strange idea. Bokuden had fought more duels than almost any man of his age and lost none of them. Yet by the end of his life, he rarely touched his sword at all. It was the fairy story, the same crossing, the same arrogant challenger. This time, Enomoto told the rest of it. Provoked past patience, the old man finally agreed to duel, but suggested they settle it properly, away from the other passengers, on a sandbar downstream. The ferryman rowed them there. The young Ronin leapt out first, sword already drawn, and the old man calmly picked up the ferryman's pole, shoved the boat back into the current, and floated away, leaving the Ronin stranded and shouting. "That," Enomoto said, "is Mutekatsu, winning without the sword. Not fear, not weakness." He understood something you don't yet. Most fights are never about survival. They're about being seen. And a fight over being seen can always be avoided by a man who doesn't need to be seen. Isn't that just cowardice with better manners? Cowardice is fighting because you're afraid of looking weak. This is the opposite. A man so certain of his own strength that no stranger's opinion can touch it. Enomoto's first assignment had no swords in it at all. For 7 days, Kaito was sent into the market town with one instruction: absorb whatever was said to him and answer none of it. The town's loudest tradesman made a game of it, mocking his walk, his hair, his sword. The first 3 days, Kaito came back shaking with rage he wasn't allowed to spend. On the 4th, Enomoto asked what he felt in his body when insulted. Heat in the chest, a tight jaw, a pulse he could hear in his own ears. "That heat is not danger," Enomoto said. "Your body cannot yet tell the difference between a blade at your throat and a stranger's opinion of your haircut. Training is teaching it that difference." By the 7th day, something had changed. A drunk tradesman spat an insult that would have ended in bloodshed a week earlier. Kaito walked on and noticed, almost with surprise, that his heartbeat hadn't moved. A man who reacts to every insult hands control of himself to anyone willing to insult him. Enomoto told him that night. You've spent your whole life letting strangers decide when your blood boils. That ends now. Enomoto gathered the senior students for a teaching Kaito would remember the rest of his life. Your body has one alarm for every threat. A bandit's blade and a rival's insult ring the same bell. Flooded blood, tightened muscle, a mind narrowed to one point. Useful if the threat is a blade. Wasted if the threat is only someone's opinion. Spent on a fight that changes nothing. He spoke of an idea he'd once heard from a traveling scholar, that a man is rarely disturbed by events themselves, but by the meaning he decides to attach to them. An insult is only air until you decide it's an injury. Bokuden understood this before anyone had words for it. He spent his whole store of that alarm on real duels, 60 of them, and never once wasted it proving a point to a stranger on a ferry. That's why he had so much left for so long. Not because he avoided every fight, because he was ruthless about which fights deserved the alarm at all. The test came from Sozaburo, the dojo's second-best blade, who challenged Kaito in front of the whole school, calling him the boy who forgot how to fight. A year earlier, Kaito would have drawn before the sentence finished. Instead, he felt the old heat rise and recognized it for what it was, a stranger's opinion dressed up as a threat. I don't need to prove anything to you, Kaito said, and walked away. The dojo laughed. Sozaburo strutted for a week, calling it a coward's retreat. 3 weeks later, a real test found Sozaburo instead. Armed drifters passed through the village, and Sozaburo, needing, as always, to be seen as the strongest, challenged their leader alone to prove the rumors about Kaito's cowardice wrong by contrast. He was carried back with a broken arm and a wound to far more than his arm. Kaito visited him that night. I wasn't afraid to fight you, he said quietly. I just knew you weren't worth the fight. For the first time, Sozaburo had nothing to say back. Real danger reached the village that winter. A former samurai turned bandit, already responsible for 2 deaths. The magistrate asked Enomoto for a blade. Enomoto sent Kaito. Kaito walked to the meeting point calm, unhurried, carrying the same stillness he'd built absorbing insults in the market. The bandit sneered at how young he looked. Kaito said nothing. This time, the heat rising in his chest was not ego. It was real. He let it come. The exchange lasted 4 seconds. 1 committed step, 1 strike, precise as a signature. The bandit went down and did not get up. Villages expected relief, triumph, something loud. Kaito only sheathed his sword and walked back toward the dojo. No performance, nothing that needed to be seen. That evening, Enomoto asked how it felt. Quiet, Kaito said. I had exactly what I needed, and nothing left over from all the fights I didn't have. Years later, Kaito ran his own dojo, and a hot-tempered young student humiliated a classmate to prove a point, the way Kaito once had. He took the boy aside that evening. Let me tell you about a ferry crossing, he began, and a swordsman who hadn't drawn his blade in 30 years. The lesson hasn't changed since Bokuden first taught it. The strongest people you'll ever meet aren't the ones who win every argument. They're the ones who no longer need to. Strength was never about how many fights you can win. It's about which ones are worth your blade at all.